After Hayat Tahrir al-Sham storming Damascus, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced the seizure of a demilitarized buffer zone inside Syria, bordering the occupied Golan Heights. This decision follows the departure of President Bashar al-Assad. Netanyahu declared the long-standing 1974 disengagement agreement between Israel and Syria as effectively nullified, citing the need for immediate action to secure Israeli interests. The implications of this move could significantly impact regional security and stability. Israel has intensified its military operations in Syria, launching air and ground strikes as the Syrian government collapses. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced the temporary seizure of a buffer zone in the Golan Heights, established by a 1974 ceasefire agreement with Syria. The National reported that Netanyahu stated that the agreement had collapsed following the fall of Bashar al-Assad, prompting Israel to secure the region. Israeli troops reportedly entered 5 villages within the buffer zone and took control of strategic positions. Meanwhile, Israel has escalated airstrikes on Syrian military sites, targeting weapons, stockpiles, chemical weapons, and missile systems. Egypt has strongly condemned Israel's seizure of the demilitarized zone along the Syrian border and nearby strategic locations, describing it as an occupation of Syrian land and a blatant violation of Syrian sovereignty. This came in the Egyptian Foreign Ministry statement, where it emphasized that this action contravenes the 1974 disengagement agreement and international law, undermining Syria's territorial integrity. Egypt accuses Israel of exploiting the current instability in Syria to impose new realities on the ground. Egypt urges the UN Security Council and international powers to act decisively to ensure Syria's sovereignty over its entire territory.
Israel's move to control Syria buffer zone raises regional security concerns. After Hayat Tahrir al-Sham entered Damascus and the Assad regime departed, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered his military to seize a demilitarized buffer zone along the Syrian border. This decision has significant implications for regional security and the stability of the Middle East. The area in question had been a demilitarized buffer zone under the 1974 disengagement agreement between Israel and Syria. This agreement aimed to prevent direct military conflict by establishing a neutral zone. This action effectively ends the long-standing disengagement agreement, which had maintained peace for nearly 50 years. This move raises significant security concerns as it could embolden military groups amid instability in Syria and the broader region. If Israel assumes control, tensions between Israel and Syria, as well as with Iran and Hezbollah, are expected to escalate. This could lead to more tensions in the Middle East. International reactions have been mixed, with major powers observing the situation closely. The United States and Russia have voiced concern over the potential for increased conflict. While the US has expressed tacit support for Israeli actions, Russia may view Israel's actions as a threat to its own influence in the region. Meanwhile, the European Union has urged all parties to respect international agreements and avoid further escalation. Analysts suggest that Israel's actions might be aimed to exploiting the chaos in Syria, which could destabilize the region and further complicate Syria's already fragile political landscape.
To help us further explore the political situation in Syria, we are joined by Dr. Mohammed Osman, an international relations specialist from Cairo, and by Dr. Hamid Faris, professor of international relations, who also join us from Cairo. Welcome to both of you, and I would start with Dr. Osman. Sir, how does Israel's seizure of the buffer zone with Syria violate Syrian sovereignty and actually breaches the disengagement agreement?
Thank you for having me, Hala. Not only is it a breach of Syrian sovereignty and the 1974 engagement agreement, it is a breach of basic international law and the UN Charter. And the breach and the violation of international law goes way back to 1967 and not only to 2024, when Israel occupied unilaterally and through a war of aggression, occupied the Syrian Golan Heights. And now they are resuming and expanding their occupied zone by moving troops into the buffer zone, which was in Syria's areas, the Syrian area of control, and it was within Syrian territories, of course, seizing several Syrian cities and towns, going about, from 14 to 21 kilometers deep, depending on which part of the map you are looking at, and occupying sovereign Syrian land and taking advantage of the absolute chaos and pandemonium consuming Syria following the collapse of the Syrian state and the Syrian government and the Syrian armed forces, of course, which used to be the bulwark of Syrian sovereignty on its front with Israel. So unfortunately, I do not see how Israel is trying to frame this. Israel is just basically brazenly saying that they have unilaterally annulled the disengagement agreement, which means that now they are basically in an open state of war with Syria because they never reached a peace agreement. And then the 1974 agreement was a ceasefire agreement that ended the 1973 war officially on paper between Syria and Israel. So, and of course, this opens the way for further Israeli aggression, as we have seen, and we still are seeing as we speak.
I'll go now to Dr. Faris, who is joining us over the phone. Sir, in what ways do Israel's actions violate international law and undermine Syria's territorial integrity?
Israel surely violating the Syrian sovereignty and using the events in Syria and the state of political vacuum in Syria to possess the Syrian territories and nulling the agreement signed between Israel and the state of the Israeli occupation in 1974. Such an agreement was sponsored by the United Nations. But Israel, pretexting that there are threats exposed to the Israeli border while entering the 14 kilometers and reoccupied Al-Gish mountain, Jabal al-Sheikh, and also possessed the buffer zone that affirmed that the hidden hands of the Israeli occupation forces to impose a new reality on the Syrian territories. And therefore, I think that Netanyahu saying that the withdrawal of this equation, which is an illegal declaration as agreement are held between the two parties, and therefore, as usual, Israel is violating the international law, and its desire is to targeting its objectives in Syria by attacking the military bases, in using the air and also attacking the aircraft such as F-19 is just a weakening the Syrian army and not to be strong again.
And Dr. Osman, how are Israel's actions in Syria exploiting the current instability to actually occupy more land and create a new reality on the ground? And this perhaps would be the situation, and it would further even try to expand more.
The Israelis are expected, it was expected really with the collapse of the Syrian government that they will take advantage of the state of fluidity and chaos inside Syria in order to expand the area of control they already have inside Syria, which is the Golan Heights. And of course, this brings us to mind the statement made by Israeli Prime Minister and wanted war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu, when he said that, and of course he's a wanted war criminal per the warrant issued by the International Criminal Court.
Yes.
He said that we are creating a new Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
And of course this entails many things, including certain territorial and geographic dimensions and changes tacitly promised to his own audience in the United States, in Israel. So what Mr. Netanyahu did, basically, excuse me, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, sir. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what this basically is that what Netanyahu is doing in Syria is trying to create this new Middle East by basically pushing forward Israel's expansion policies and expansionist projects. Israel already is creating a buffer zone inside northern Gaza, displacing hundreds of thousands of people and killing tens of thousands in order to achieve that, which is an act of genocide and ethnic cleansing, a textbook act. And I say that as a human rights worker who can claim expertise in this field. And also, they maintain even though it's called a temporary presence in southern Lebanon, but it doesn't seem they are withdrawing from southern Lebanon anytime soon, and they might even create a buffer zone in there. And now they are creating a temporary, quote-unquote, buffer zone inside Syria, and they say it will only be for 60 days subject to renewal. But of course, all the Israeli lands occupied by Israel were always occupied temporarily, according to Israeli officials, but then they never go out. And this was the pretext of occupying the Golan Heights, and this will be the pretext of occupying these parts of Syria now. However, it poses the question: will Israel stop there? Because there are rumors and reports, very unsettling reports, that say that Israel might actually expand further to reach the interior of the province of Daraa, or even Suwaidat, which is dominated by the Druze sect in Syria. Of course, these are all unverified and unconfirmed reports, but if they are true, then we are looking at a complete redrawal of the map of Syria and the map of de facto Israel as well.
Dr. Faris, what role should the United Nations Security Council and international powers play in responding to Israel's aggression against Syria? Yes, sir. I was just asking you, in your opinion, what role should the United Nations Security Council and international powers play in responding to Israel's aggression against Syria?
Certainly, it's a new test exposed by the international institution, on top of which UN Security Council against the exceeding violations and the occupation of the Syrian Golan. Even the agreement, even though pretexted to cancel it, and upon the disagreement between Israel and Syria, the UN Security Council should move to maintain the Syrian sovereignty if they are supporting Syria as saying, as well as the United States and the UN Security Security Council to move strongly to deter the unilateral Israeli action that disabled the region as a whole, not only the Syrian terrorists itself, and should be determined to move strongly as Israel is pursuing to establish a buffer zone in reality in the northern of Gaza and displacing the Palestinian people from the north. And up till now, they're doing repetitive violations in the Lebanese side. And its forces are still messing around in the south of Lebanon and never withdrawn, and made more than firing in the religious places and heading to Syria to reoccupy the places and villages that the Israeli occupation forces withdrawn following the 1973. Therefore, the Israeli deed should be confronted strongly. But how for the United States to do so, as particularly the supporting also poor and stay still as long as this goes for the interest for the Israeli occupation forces, and therefore the international community is crippled before these actions. But all the resolutions from the ICC, the UN Security Councils aren't implemented. Resolution of the International Justice Court as well. In the view of the whole world, the major country do not respect the international law nor the human international laws.
Dr. Osman, how has the departure of Bashar al-Assad affected regional security dynamics? How has his departure actually influenced the security of the entire region?
Of course, the former President Assad and the Syrian government will have a very adverse and terrible impact on the regional security situation. Of course, many of the factions, so-called rebel factions or armed factions that have seized Damascus and basically toppled the government and dismembered the Syrian state and military, are again terrorist organizations or have terrorist affiliations, including the most prominent and the largest of these factions, which is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS. HTS is classified as a terrorist organization by the United Nations Security Council. And there's nothing anyone can do to change that anytime soon. And this was upon the record of this movement and the nature of its activities inside Syria and beyond. So now, trying to rebrand Hayat Tahrir al-Sham as a moderate rebel group, it's quite farcical, to be honest, and does not neutralize the dangers posed by this plethora of jihadist radical movements inside Syria, which will be a very destabilizing factor for the entire region, for all the countries, the Arab states, and even for Israel itself, potentially. Ironically enough, since Israel is such an ardent supporter of these movements at the moment in their previous fight against Bashar al-Assad and the proxies of Iran inside Syria. So it will have a very dangerous impact on the regional situation, especially in countries like Iraq and Jordan that are now watching the situation in Syria with utmost concern, because some splinter groups or jihadist, a very radical jihadist movement that Mr. Ahmed al-Shara cannot control, for example, may elect to launch attacks, for example, against Jordanian territories or Iraqi territories, especially given the history, the very recent history of Iraq and the impact of these movements on Iraqi stability. And they caused a civil war inside Iraq from 2014 to 2017 with the rise of ISIS. And let's not forget that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham splintered, which was Jabhat al-Nusra, it splintered from Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which became ISIS later on. So this is something that we have to keep in mind and watch with utmost concern, in my view. So unfortunately, it will have a very, very adverse and negative effect on the regional security situation.
Dr. Ferris, what are the implications of Israel's military entering 14 kilometers into Syrian territory for the first time since 1974?
It's a catastrophic implications upon Syria, its integrity, its sovereignty. This incursion will be followed by a greater incursion, as Israel do not wish to have a strong Syrian state. Now is jumping upon the Syrian assets and destroy all the arms of the Israeli army, the targeting the ammunition storage, and it is possible to enter to more than that distance, therefore should be confronted. The international community should move strongly to confront Israel, particularly that matters in Syria are opened to all scenarios. So we're talking about extremist and terrorist groups are within Syria. We're talking about that the Syrian state should embrace a comprehensive political process until writing a new constitution and new elections to the parliament and the presidency in order to pave the way for an elected government, as Israel is not going to withdraw easily by saying that it will last for more than 60 days and it is acceptable to be extended. Therefore, it is in fact reoccupied the southern Syrian.
Dr. Osman, how does the cancellation of the disengagement agreement impact the already escalated situation in the Middle East?
As we said before, Israel has unilaterally declared the disengagement agreement null and void. And of course, this is a very dangerous precedent because this is the first time an armistice agreement between an Arab state and Israel has been abrogated in this manner, for example. And what has been keeping Syria and Israel out of a state of open conflict for the past 50 years or so is the disengagement agreement. So now by Israel basically canceling the agreement, they are releasing themselves from any commitments under these agreements not to commit any acts of hostility or military actions against Syria, since Syria and Israel are legally still in a state of war. And of course, Netanyahu will abuse that along with his right-wing hardline government to destroy, as Dr. Hamid, to destroy and eviscerate the assets of the remaining assets of the Syrian state. They are destroying weapons stockpiles. They are destroying air defenses. They are destroying aircraft, military air bases, allegedly chemical weapons storage facilities, and chemical weapon manufacturing facilities. These are the kind of things, and of course, several military leadership command installations as well, like the military intelligence, for example, which they destroyed in an airstrike yesterday in Damascus. So it seems that the cancellation of the agreement allows them to do that. However, what it does not allow them to do is to basically implement a brazen and a completely unacceptable land grab inside Syria, with the seizure of Jabal al-Sheikh, with the seizure of Qnews and several other villages, marching 20 kilometers deep into Syrian territory. And they say that we might even after we create the buffer zone, we will create another security zone beyond the UN designated buffer zone, which is a very dangerous statement by Israeli officials, unfortunately. So the annulment of the agreement opens the door for further Israeli aggression and Israeli expansion and further instability inside Syria.
Well, that was Dr. Muhammad Osman, International Relations Specialist, joining us from Cairo. Thank you so much. And Dr. Hamid Faris, Professor of International Relations from Cairo. Thank you both very much for your valuable insights. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Qnews.